Okay, ICS4C, welcome. Lesson 4.2, our second lesson on GUI. We'll see some more elements today, some more things that you're used to seeing on forms and web pages and that sort of thing. And again, this file you have, I hope, so you're just following along, adding your own thoughts where you need to, with lots of encouragement to stop the video and try stuff on HTML to see what happens. Anytime you think, I wonder what happens if, you should pause the video and try that if and see what the results are. That's where a lot of the good computer science learning happens, remember. Checkboxes. What's a checkbox? Checkboxes are a collection of elements where more than one box or none can be selected. As a collection, we put checkboxes in a field set. So checkboxes are, you see them in a bunch of different things can be checked off or not. There's some code. I'm going to grab that code and paste that into Fiddle again. Again, JSBin, Notepad++, doesn't matter. I should have this. Notice that my labels in this are, almost need a little more space here. There we go. My labels in this case aren't labels, they're just text, but let's have a look at what this looks like. There. And we see the checkboxes. I can check all of them. I can check none of them. It's all good. The labels are one and whatever. What else did I want to mention is that right now, none of them are checked, but I can add attributes into my HTML to fix that. For instance, if I want this one to be checked, I just put in checked. Run that. And so its default is to be checked. Notice that you could have all of these checked or none of them checked. That's all good. I think that's probably in the note here somewhere. Let's see how we're doing. Optionally, we can add labels to each checkbox or a legend for our field set. Remember, field set, we could have, this one never did it, but we could have a little title in there. If we use the legend tags inside our field set, that's allowed. What am I doing? Don't want that. Back to the note. Labels, right? I use just text as my labels, but I could use label tags like we saw yesterday. Notice how we included an ID for CSS styling, a value for JavaScript programming. So, for instance, later on, we're going to have like a submit button or something like that that will start and activate our JavaScript. Well, what we want is that click has to have a value. Like the text box, it made sense that what's ever inside the text box would be the value. But when I checked off this box, this one box, what's its value? The value is going to be select one. That's what I've assigned. So could that be a number or something like that? Well, yeah, it could be. But we'll deal with that when we talk about JavaScript. Notice also this name. And notice in this case, the names were all the same for this collection of checkboxes. Now, that could be like that, or it could be different. That's up to you. It makes sense for us to call them all the same name so that when we refer to JavaScript, that we can access the data from this whole set of checkboxes at once. And it says if needed. Is that it for this slide? Nope. There's the example. We talked about this. Field set with no legend, the checkbox. These are checkboxes, and we can see that we can check one of them or none of them. And they just check them on and off by clicking. And notice that that happens automatically in HTML. I didn't have to add a JavaScript or jQuery event to do the clicking business. That was an HTML thing. I think that's all I wanted to say about checkboxes. Radio buttons. Radio buttons. Radio buttons are a collection of elements where only one can be selected. So, and they look different. As a collection, we put radio buttons inside a field set, similar to checkboxes. They're cousins, these two, radio buttons and checkboxes. Notice the type is radio, where over here the type was checkbox. It's an input where the type is checkbox. Here the type is radio. I'll just copy this so we get this going. Notice that in the forms, I can have forms as complicated or as easy as I like. So in my form, there's one field set, and here's another field set that will represent I should have a different name. I don't want to confuse the poor thing. My field set 2 is going to be radio buttons, and I'm going to show you what they look like by running. Notice I got my 2 field sets, and the radio buttons, when I check on another one, it automatically unchecks one of them. See that? Over here, I could have all, that's a checkbox. These are radio buttons. They're easy to get goofed up, but I think I would remember them as a checkbox is a box shape. A radio button is a button shape, right? It looks like a button that you'd put on your shirt, right? Buttons aren't square. Like buttons on a shirt aren't square anyway. The type is radio, and we see that we can select all or none of them. One thing that I want to mention is when I loaded this page, I pressed run, that the 1 was already selected, and that's because that one had the key attribute checked already in there. We saw that with the checkboxes, but if I don't have that and I run it, it is possible to not have any radio buttons checked, but you know, often you'll want to have a default one selected so that if somebody submits a form, that there's some sort of default selection. If you didn't have in there, we'll see that there's ways to handle that using error handling in JavaScript, but we'll worry about that later. Okay, good. Checkboxes, radio buttons. What else do I have here? Probably just the example. Notice that we can add an attribute called check to have a button serve as a default selection. This is true for checkboxes as well. We saw that yesterday, that or last did we see that last no, there was none checked here, but we could have that. We could have a checkbox checked as well. Notice that only one radio button can be selected at once. That's the big thing. Radio buttons, there's only one that can be selected. By clicking on one of the other radio buttons, we automatically unselect the other one. Okay, good. Radio buttons, checkboxes. Last thing for today is drop-down menus, and drop-down menus are pretty cool. HTML structure. We use the select tags. So select and select, and notice I've got my option values. They have the value, and then they have whatever text that represents them, and I'll show you what that looks like on the HTML by copying and pasting. I'm hoping that you're doing this too, because it's a bit of fun to play with this stuff. And I'll put it. Notice that when I don't have that in a field set. Remember, the field set is what gives that nice border, and I could change the border in CSS. Remember, but we're not. I'm hoping that you'll get fancy with yours, but I'm not getting fancy in the notes. That the drop-down menu, notice, isn't in a border. It's not. It doesn't have it's not in a field set, so it doesn't have a border. And then this drop-down menu is exactly what it looks like. So each of these selections are an option open and close tag. So select a value. Notice how to add a value of space. But then when I click on that, I can see all the different other possibilities, and it behaves exactly like you've seen on the website, right? You click on that one, and that one is the selection. Okay. Back to the note. Pretty cool. Optionally, we can add the attribute multiple to the opening select tag to allow for multiple menu selections. So have a look at this. This is pretty cool. So right now I can't. So for instance, once I select third, that's it. Even if I press Control, it only selects the first one. But if I change this and have this as multiple, I put in multiple there and run it, Notice that it's a little different feel to it, and I can select a whole bunch. I press Control and I can select a whole bunch, right? And then all of those are selected. I can add one of them to be a default, just like up here I had one of them be the default selection by adding the word check. I can have a default selection by having the word selected, right? So right now, third is the selection. If I were to press submit, third would be selected. But I can unselect that by clicking on it or clicking on something else and then click on other ones. That's the multiple business. Fun to mess around with that. And of course, you change these things and your web page behaves a little bit differently. And that's where the design part of it comes in. Optionally, we can have one or more options pre-selected using the selected attribute in the opening option tag. Notice how we still include the value attribute for use in JavaScript. So again, value we put in there so that when we select this and it goes to the JavaScript part, that means we would have the value 3, but we're not doing anything with that yet, right? So in our web page, yeah, sure, we can enter into uh, text boxes and we can check on stuff and radio buttons and drop down menus, but nothing's going on, right? There's no processing. Like this means nothing except for it looks nice. That's it. That's all we've done so far. So next up is actually getting some processing going on with these things. But before that, I want you to practice some of this stuff. So I think in this form, in this 4.2 form, there's an exercise, and then there's a couple of exercises described on the website that gets you going on doing some of your own GUI stuff. So have fun with that. I think that's it for my slides. Yeah, and then you'll have an exercise. As your next page, you'll have an exercise. And then have fun with those exercises.